صل على رسوله الكريم. Respectful friends, from the discourses that we've had over the last week, we have now gathered how Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam had carried out his mission of tazkiyah upon the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala an, and how tazkiyah was one of the missions of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described as being وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ, and how this tazkiyah was a pivotal aspect of the life of the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala an. And this is to clarify for those who are a misconception that there was no such thing as Tasawwuf during the time of the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and during the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala an. Because وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ is what Tasawwuf was or is. And how the few examples that I've given you, those itself shows us how the aspect of tasawwuf was always in the heart or in the mind of the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala an. It wasn't something that was disattached or something that was carried out separately. Because you'll find there was different forms of other missions and ibadah that were done, where the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala an would leave their daily work and jobs and come into the masjid and perform the salah. Then they would do the fasting, they would give in sadaqah, they would go out in fi sabilillah, in jihad, or in teaching people knowledge and that. So these were various other things or ibadats and faculties that they would spread out in and do separately. But when it came to tazkiyah wasn't something that was done separately, or they would go out separately for that, because in whatever they did, tazkiyah was part of everything that they did. The example I gave you of innamal a'malu binniyat, that without the intention, no deed of ours will be accepted. And the correctness of our intention comes about through tazkiyah alone. Because the correction of the intention has to do with our inner self, with the heart. So it doesn't matter what you do, without the sincerity of intention, that deed and action will not be accepted. As Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions in the hadith. And this shows how tazkiyah is important for every person. That you have an alim, and that alim, he learns knowledge and he teaches knowledge, but his intention is to be famous, to be well known for the sake of name and fame, that he will be amongst the first people to be thrown into the fire of Jahannam. The mujahid, who is doing the greatest of jihads, actually giving his life for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but if his intention is incorrect, if his intention is to show people, or so that people will praise his courage and bravery, then he will be from the first ones to be flung into the fire of Jahannam. A generous person, who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given wealth, and he spends that wealth and he donates and he gives that wealth in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But there again, he doesn't have sincerity in his intention. It is done for show, for name. He'll be from the first person to be flung into the fire of Jahannam. So he is somebody who is a very generous person, who is good in giving. Another is an alim, the other is a mujahid, a ghazi. But all of them, if the intention isn't correct, sincerity of intention, then no matter what they do, there won't be ikhlas in it. It is for that reason we find that tazkiyah was something that was in the life of every single person. It wasn't a separate thing. It is now in our times that tazkiyah has become separated from everything else. So a person will be doing only tabligh, a person may be doing only ta'aleem, and in doing so, the tazkiyah element has become a separate faculty on its own. Whereas in the past, no matter what they were doing, tazkiyah was there at all times. As I mentioned to you from this life of the Sahaba and examples I have given you, it is there. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself mentions, قَدْ أَفْلَهَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. So to acquire that success, the tazkiyah played an important role. And never mind that, afterwards as well we find. After the Sahaba radiallahu an, when we come to the Tabi'een and we come to the Aimma and them, even in their lives we find how important tazkiyah was. That despite whatever they were doing, they all had tazkiyah in their lives. Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, now we know what a great faqih he was, what a great muhaddis he was as well. Day and night he spent in tadween al-fiqh, in compiling fiqh. But at the same time, tazkiyah and tasawwuf was a main part of his life as well. Wherein he himself mentions that if it wasn't for the time he spent in the suhbah, in the company of Ja'far Sadiq, he says, that if it wasn't for those 2 years he spent with him, he says, that if it wasn't for those 2 years, then Nu'man would have been destroyed. That Nu'man would have been destroyed. But it was, I attained and acquired what I did because of those 2 years I spent in the suhbah, in the company of Ja'far as-Sadiq. Imam Shafi rahimahullah mentions that when it comes to softening of the heart, I learned leniency, I learned gentle speech and good manners from who? I learned that from the Sufis. That I would go to them, and by being with them I learned how to soften the heart. Imam Malik rahimahullah even actually commands and says that learn tafaqquh, learn fiqh. So fiqh is important. But that alone without tasawwuf is not enough. And do not learn tasawwuf without fiqh. Otherwise what happens is that a person becomes ignorant. So he mentions that you need to have tafaqquh with tasawwuf. You have both of these. And who is saying this? Imam Malik rahimahullah. If you have both of these, then you are kamil, you are complete. As I mentioned to you previously. Because both of these are important. Because if you do not have tafaqquh, if you do not have knowledge of your ibadat, then your physical ibadat will be incorrect. If that is incorrect, then that ibadat won't be accepted. And if you have tafaqquh, you have all the fiqh that is there. But you do not have the internal purification, then again, your ibadat won't be accepted. If there is no ikhlas there. So, he says to be complete, both of these needs to be there. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah, he would actually spend time in the company of Abu Hashim as-Sufi. And Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullah even mentions that one is you have somebody who is alim bil kitab and the other is alim billah. The ulama, they are alim bil kitab. They have knowledge of the scriptures, of books. And the Sufis, they are alim billah, they have ilm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says, he goes to that extent and says, alim billah has greater fazilat and virtues over alim bil kitab. So this is Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal. To that extent that even the likes of Ibn Taymiyyah, who is well known for eradicating a lot of things, he himself has written volumes on the importance of tasawwuf. Wherein even he objects to those people who criticize tasawwuf and say that it is a form of a bid'ah. Where he mentions that such people are mushtahidin fi ita'atillah, fi ta'atillah. That they are who? They are mushtahidin in the ita'at of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because what they do is they are concerned all the time in purification and purifying themselves. So even like Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah has shown the importance. And the reality is that all these, our predecessors that we talk about, and also those who we may know in our times, or who we have attachment with in ours, we can say those who are from in the subcontinent, even they, all of them we find that they all, with whatever they were doing, they all had this link of tasawwuf, they all had this link of tazkiyah, because they all understood the importance of it. Mawlana Rashid Ahmad Gangohi rahimahullah, who was a great scholar of his time, and who was given the title of Abu Hanifa of his time, thus how much knowledge Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him with regards to fiqh and that. Where he himself on one occasion mentions that if the teacher, ustad himself is sahib nisbat, and the students are sahib nisbat, then the enjoyment of teaching hadith is totally something different. If both the ustad and the teacher is sahib nisbat. And they became sahib nisbat only through this form of tazkiyah and tasawwuf. So it wasn't a separate thing. It is you and I who have separated it from our lives and think it to be something totally different. And we regard it and think of it to be something for only other people, those people who are into dhikr and tasawwuf, and that it is only for them. Whereas it is something which is essential for every single believer. for you to be a complete believer, you cannot be a complete believer until you do not have ikhlas in your heart. Until you do not have proper iman in your heart. Until you haven't saved yourself from shirk. Until you haven't purified yourself from internally, you can't be a complete believer. And this purification of the inner self comes about through tazkiyah, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, which was from a part of the mission of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself says to us, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا, that the one who has done his tazkiyah has acquired success. And he's acquired his success because he has purified and he has sorted out the inner self, his internal self. So again, as I mentioned to you, no matter what a person is doing, if he doesn't have ikhlas, that action is not accepted. And correction of our intention, acquiring ikhlas, all this has to do with the inner self. And this can only come about with purification of the intention. If our hearts are pure from show, if our hearts are pure from pride, then we can have ikhlas. If it isn't, then we can't have ikhlas. Where we suffer from pride and show, then whatever we do, be it a major deed or minor deed, no matter what it is, if there is pride in the heart, then there isn't going to be any ikhlas in what we do. And without ikhlas, no deed of ours, no action of ours will be accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the difference that I mentioned to you between our ibadat and that of the Sahaba. Their ibadat were fully accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because the zahir and the batin, the external and internal, both were purified and both of these conformed with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted. And this only comes about by the means of tazkiyah. And as I mentioned to you, our last majlis on Thursday, how the Sahabi who had the desire, inclination towards committing zina, and what does he do? He comes to Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he mentions it to him, and Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam gives him advice. When Sayyidina Hamza radiallahu ta'ala had the doubt in him of nifaq, he comes to Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Nabi Kareem removes that. In this way, there are so many examples there of how Nabi Kareem made the tazkiyah, because they knew that they need to for tazkiyah, and the examples I had given to you, that it is because it is a spiritual illness. And for all illnesses, you need to go to a doctor to remedy it. For knowledge, if you want knowledge of deen, you have to go to the ulama who have knowledge of deen. And for tazkiyah and purification, you have to go to those people who are specialists in tazkiyah and purification. The Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala didn't need to go to any mashayikh because Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was all in one. Where Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was sent for all these things. وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ. He was sent for all these things. So, Nabi Kareem, وَيُتْلُوا عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِكَ. So when they wanted to learn tajweed and how to read the Quran, the Qari was Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Where they needed to do the tazkiyah, the shaykh and the murshid was Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Where they needed to learn ahadith, the muhaddis was Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Where they needed to learn the Quran, the mufassir there was Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Where they needed to know what to do in battle, the general and the commander was Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What they need to do with regards to political scenarios, the greatest politician was Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala, they didn't need to go to individual people because they found everything in the complete character of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But then later on you do find, where then they needed to go to those people who specialized in, because not one person cannot specialize in so many different things. He can't. But Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sent for these purposes, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had placed all these abilities in him. This way I mentioned to you, with regards to medicine as well, one is the general illnesses that we have, we go to who? We go to the GP. And the GP is known as a GP because general practitioner. Because he will just diagnose general illnesses. But then where he gets stuck, what he does is, he's going to refer us to specialists. And specialists in different fields. Those in different fields. Now if a person has issues with regards to the heart, then he's going to refer him to a heart specialist. And that person is one who is specialized in heart specialist. Now you go to heart specialist and you speak to him and mention to him that you've got problems with your ears. He'll say to you, look, you've come to the wrong person. For that you need to go to a person who specializes in that. So for me, my duty is, my job is, my qualification is with regards to the heart. So in the same way you find with regards to our deen as well, we have people who specialize in different things. And for that, to go to them for that purpose is essential. And the other reason I mentioned to you, with regards to these a few examples of Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Shafi and them, how they went to the Sufis, those people who were actually on the path of struc, who were devoted to this purification of the heart and cleansing the heart. So they would go to them. And this is something that we need to do. We cannot do tazkiyah ourselves. We cannot read the books of Tasawwuf and think that we can make tazkiyah by books. We have to go in the sohbat. That's why one of the important things of Tasawwuf is sohbat. And sohbat is what? Company. The Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala, we call them what? Sahaba, plural. Sahabi, one companion. And where did the name of the word in Arabic Sahaba come from? Sahabi come from? It comes from Sahaba, from Sohbat. Why? Because companion. Because they came in the company of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and by them being in the company of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they became a Sahabi. This is how they became a Sahabi. And it was because of this companionship with the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that they became a Sahabi. And till the day of Qiyamah now, no individual can become a Sahabi. No Tabi could become a Sahabi. Why? Because they didn't have that sohbah with Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They didn't have that companionship with the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if we think about it, when it comes to knowledge and Quran and these things, we have the Quran in better form than the Sahaba had. In that time, the Quran wasn't even compiled as yet. They just had it, whatever was preserved on certain paper, on leaves or bones, whatever it was. Hadith, it was whatever individual Sahaba had remembered. So they didn't have what we have today. But now every person, they want to read the Quran, no matter where you are in the world, you just on your mobile phones, you can have the entire Quran there. You want the books of Hadith, they're all compiled for you. You just go somewhere, you just search for a keyword in and you'll have all the Hadith in front of you. So today we have it in better form, easier form. But despite all that, nobody today can become a Sahabi. The same Quran they have, we have. The same Hadith they have, we have it. But we have it in better form as well. But we cannot become a Sahabi. Why? Because we did not acquire the sohbah, the companionship of the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They acquired that, and because of that companionship, they became what they did. And that is something for us to remember, that it was the relationship of Sahaba with Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That these were the same Sahaba, the same companions who prior to Islam were so ignorant, were very ignorant, were involved in so many things, and now their condition becomes such that they are in the company of the Prophet of Allah, and being with him, they saw everything, all the good character that a person needs to acquire in their spiritual selves, within themselves. They saw that in the Prophet of Allah, and they picked that up from his company. Because the amount is, one is you just read about something, and the other is you actually experience that. The other is you experience that. There's a big difference in that. Somebody gives a talk and tries to explain to you the smell or the fragrance of rose or the fragrance of another flower. You try and you can try and explain this through words, you cannot explain it. Until you don't actually get the flower and smell it, you won't understand the fragrance of it. Similarly, the taste of something. Somebody tries and mentions to you the taste of a fruit. Until you haven't tasted, you can't understand it. In the same way, when it comes to all these spiritual or inner qualities that we're supposed to have, it can be explained as much as possible. We won't understand it until we don't see somebody who has these qualities in them. And for this you find that the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala, they had the Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they physically saw all these qualities in him, and that then rubbed on to him. This was so much. Any company that you go in, your company has an effect on you. Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions, Al-maru ala dini khalilihi falyanzur ahadukum man yukhalilhu. That a person is on the deen, on the way of his friend. Whoever his company is, he will become like that person. So فَلْيَنْظُرْ أَحَدُكُمْ مَنْ يُخَالِلْهُ. Hence the person to check and see who they make their friends. Now the Sahaba, the companions, they had made the Prophet of Allah their companion, their friendship with. They were constantly there in his company. And that the effect of his company rubbed off onto them. And then they became what they did become. It is for that reason that you find that no wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the greatest of qutubs, can even reach the rank of a sahabi. Cannot reach the rank of the sahabi. Which shows us as well. Which shows us that this is we're talking about a wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that is the highest that any of us can acquire. But that same wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot reach the stage of a sahabi, which shows that all the sahaba were already sahib nisbat. That the sahaba was sahib nisbat. Every sahabi was a wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Each one was a wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And along with that, and how did they all become a wali of Allah? Through being in the company of the greatest wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is by his sabr and being with him, each one then, from a life of kufr and shirk, from a life of kufr and shirk, they come out of that life, and then they come into a life, and then they come into the company of the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and by doing so, they all then become a wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this tazkiyah and tasawwuf, the purpose of that is that each one becomes a wali of Allah. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. That the reason and the purpose why He has created jinn and ins is what? لِيَعْبُدُونَ, to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this ibadah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the purpose of that is what? لِيَعْرِفُونَ. So that we can recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the ma'rifat and recognition of Allah comes through the ibadat. But out of which form of ibadat? An example that I've given you, it can't come through the forms of ibadat that you and I are doing. No, it can only come through that ibadat wherein the external and the internal are both according to the shariat and conform. Where physically the ibadat is correct, and spiritually the ibadat is correct as well. It is only then that ibadat will become a means of recognizing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is the purpose for which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us, so that we all recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that recognition will come through the ibadat. But on condition, the spiritual self, our condition of ours, is of that caliber, or is of that level, that makes our ibadat accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by which then we can recognize Allah. As I mentioned to you, the beginning of tasawwuf is innamal a'malu binniyat, and the ultimate of tasawwuf is what? The condition of ihsan. The condition of ihsan. And this condition of ihsan will only come about when we acquire the ma'rifah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we have the ma'rifah of Allah, the recognition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we will have the quality of ihsan. And this quality of ihsan is to do with the internal self of an individual. And this should be one of our goals in our life, is to acquire the position of ihsan. With Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, أَن تَعْبُدَ اللَّهَ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَاهُ فَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ تَرَاهُ فَإِنَّهُ يَرَاكَ. When you do the ibadat of Allah, you need to be doing the ibadat of Allah as if you are seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the highest position of ihsan. And if you cannot acquire that position, then if you cannot see Allah, then contemplate that Allah is looking at you. This is the condition of how our ibadat is supposed to be. Now each one asks ourselves, is our ibadat to that nature or not? Is our salah of that nature or not yet? If it isn't, then why isn't it not? The reason why it isn't is because that spiritual void that is there in ourselves. That we are performing the ibadat of Allah, but spiritually our hearts are not attached to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and tasawwuf is attaching this heart with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. An example I usually give is that when we do ibadat of Allah, we do ibadat of Allah like robots do. We are all like robots. A robot, you program a robot, and that robot will carry that program out to the T. Whatever you program it to do, it will do it. But does that robot have any feelings, understanding? the robot has no feelings, no understanding whatsoever. As you programmed it, it will go and do that to perfection. We are the same as well. We are the same as well. That we programmed our lives. It's a time for Asr, I need to go to the masjid. We go to the masjid, we'll do the wuzu, we'll come in the masjid, we perform our salah. After salah, we'll go, we do what we normally do. Then we program to come back for Maghrib salah, we'll come back, we perform our Maghrib, and we finish our Maghrib, we go off. We program to come back for Isha, we go back, we program to come for Fajr, we go back, we program to do this ibadah, we program to do that ibadah. We've programmed ourselves, and like a lifeless robot, we come into the masjid, we'll sit in our places as well, and everything, the whole routine goes through, and we're performing our salah as robots as well. But is there any connection in our actions with our heart? Is there any connection there whatsoever? There's no connection there whatsoever. And this is the condition of all of us. This is how we're performing our salah. There's no connection there whatsoever. Whereas the physical salah that we have, for each rukn, each action of ours, it represents something. When we do the opening takbir, and when we say Allahu Akbar, and when we raise the hands and we say Allahu Akbar, it's supposed to represent something. It represents something. And we are saying to everyone that up till now, we were with you. We were with you all the time, but now the time comes that now I need to stand in front of Allah. And when that is the case, then I am raising my hands and I'm pushing everybody else behind now. Everybody go. Why? Because now it is only Allahu Akbar. Prior to this, I did the khidmah of my parents. Prior to this, as a wife, I did khidmah of my husband, the husband did of his wife, he did discharge all his duties to whoever he had to. But now that time has come when everybody now go back. It is now only Allahu Akbar. And he says Allahu Akbar and he begins his salah. And at that moment he is switched off from the dunya and he's attached with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu ta'ala mentions, the Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, whilst at home, he'll be talking with us, speaking with us, he'll be helping in the house as well. He'll be helping in the house as well. But as soon as he would hear the voice of Sayyidina Bilal, and he would hear the adhan, the complexion of his face would change, and he would become as if he doesn't even recognize us. And this same Nabi of Allah who is joking with them, talking with them, smiling, laughing and everything, meaning that he's totally mixed with his family people. But Sayyidah Aisha says, when the azan comes, then as if he doesn't know us. Meaning that from that time he knows. Look, the azan, his call is what? It is not his call, it is the call of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that, oh my servants, you spent enough time now with your family now. Now come towards me. Now come, hayya ala salah. Come to the salah, hayya ala falah, come towards your success. Don't forget, I've given you this life. And I've given you all the time to spend with your family people as well. But do not forget the one who's given you this life. Do not forget the one who's given you the food that you've enjoyed. Don't forget the one who's given you the family that you can enjoy. Now is my time. Nabi Kareem's complexion would change. Why? Because now he's already attaching the heart with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we're saying Allahu Akbar and we fasten our hands in humility in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then we're reading the Surah Fatiha, the Qiraat, all these things. So when we're reading these things, we are talking with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're speaking with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Today we stand on the Musalla and we're doing the Qiraat. We're doing the Qiraat. Whether we're reading on our own or whether it may be the Imam of the Masjid. We'll be reading. And at times we may be reading in the most melodious of tunes and voices as well. But it is just, as I mentioned, like a robot tuned to do something. When we're reading, is there any connection between what's coming from our tongues and our hearts? Is there any connection between our hearts and the one who we're facing towards? There's no connection there at all. It is for that reason that you find that at the end of Salah, how do we end our Salah? We end our Salah by saying what? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. If you want, it should be just once. But we say it twice. Why? Because at that time a person does salam, if he's in Jamaat, he's making intention of all the people in his right. And he's making all intention to people in his left. Why? Because he had said, when he said Allahu Akbar, he had said goodbye to them. When a person goes somewhere, you come back, you do what? You do salam. So he had said goodbye to them the moment he raised his hands. And he was now in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and now he's completed his salah, he's coming back to the people in this world, so he comes back by greeting them. So this was my Mi'raj. This was my Mi'raj. I had gone for my Mi'raj, and Mi'raj went where? Mi'raj, Nabi Kareem went to the Arsh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is my Mi'raj, where now I stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I go 5 times a day, and I go and I visit my Allah. How many of us have that enjoyment in our salah? We don't, because, as I mentioned, it's just that physical robots that we go in there without a heart. And to make it a little fun for you, it's season time as well. You've heard of Wizard of Oz. And you have the Tin Man. And the Tin Man wants what? Tin Man wants a heart. We are all the Tin Man. Our ibadah is like a Tin Man. We're just physically doing everything without any heart there. No attachment with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is through tazkiyah that we revive this heart, so that whatever we do, there is that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Time is up. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all this ability as well. Inshallah we shall continue tomorrow. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.